On this week's episode of the Best of Johnston County podcast, we have a special edition we call Ask Jonathan Breeden Anything. And in this episode, myself and Raina Birch discuss custody during the school year, extracurricular activities for children, different visitation schedules during the school year, the difference between what happens during the school year when you have a custody order and when you don't, and can you just go and unilaterally change your child's school? So if you've ever thought about these questions about what would happen during custody or separation during school, this podcast may answer those questions for you. So listen in.
Welcome to another episode of Best of Johnston County, brought to you by Breeden Law Office. Our host, Jonathan Breeden, an experienced family lawyer with a deep connection to the community, is ready to take you on a journey through the area that he has called home for over 20 years. Whether it's a deep dive into the love locals have for the county or unraveling the complexities of family law, Best of Johnston County presents an authentic slice of this unique community.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Best of Johnston County podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Breeden. And on today's episode, we're having a special edition episode that we call Ask Jonathan Breeden Anything. Normally, I, Jonathan Breeden, interview interesting community leaders, elected officials, small business owners in the Johnston County area about what they love about Johnston County and what brought them here and the businesses they provide. But every once in a while, we do these special edition episodes called Ask Jonathan Breeden Anything, where I, Jonathan Breeden, answer questions from our social media coordinator, Raina Birch, about different things that relates to family law. And that's what we do here at the Breeden Law Office. We practice family law. Today's episode is going to be about custody in the school year and how custody may change during the school year and different things you can do to make the school year go better for you, your child, and your former partner if you're in a custody situation. Ready to go, Raina?
I'm ready if you are.
Okay, I'm ready.
All right. First question. How should parents handle custody arrangements for an upcoming school year or the new school year? How does that change things?
Well, it all starts, as we often answer these questions, is do you have a court order signed by a judge or not?
Yeah.
If you have a court order signed by a judge, then the court order is going to almost certainly address visitation during the school year and visitation in the summer. So you would go to the court order and whatever it says you have, and you have to do what the judge ordered. You know, oftentimes nowadays it's 50-50 and it can be week on, week off, or 2-2-3, Monday, Tuesday, mom, Wednesday, Thursday, dad, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, mom, Monday, Tuesday, dad, the sort of rotating 2-2-3 schedule. There's week on, week off.
There's different. For older kids, there's 2-2-5.
Right. There's 2-2-5, which is every Monday, Tuesday, mom, every Wednesday, Thursday, dad, and every other Friday, Saturday, Sunday for the different parents. So the weekend attaches to the weekday. Mm-hmm. So it would be in week one, Monday and Tuesday, mom, Wednesday and Thursday, dad, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday of week two, mom, those 5 in a row. Yep. And then dad would get 5 Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday as the weekdays attached to the weekends. And so you end up in what we call 2-2-5-5 scenario. And then there's 2-2-3 where you're constantly rotating and that's for smaller children.
Yeah.
And then for older children, I think week on, week off is better.
Yeah.
They can go longer without seeing the other parent. I mean, judges.
And it's just a lot less back and forth for the kids.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but if it's not some sort of shared custody like that, then oftentimes, even if you're not 50-50 during the school year, a court is going to make it 50-50 during the summer. So oftentimes, even if you're only getting every other weekend, it's not unusual for a judge to say, we're going to do week on, week off in the summer. Traditional summers are anywhere from 10 to 12 weeks. So you're going to get 5 to 6 weeks of time in a traditional school calendar summer with the child. Then, of course, there's if the parents are not living near each other, then the non-custodial parent would get 6 or 7 or 8 of those 10 or 11 weeks in the summer. Yeah. So you're going to do what the court order says. Whatever the court order says about what the visitation will be during the school year is what you're going to follow. If you don't have a court order, then it's got back to what you and the other parent can agree to. Yeah. And, whatever y'all can agree to that you think works best for the child during the school year is what you're going to do. And if you can't agree, ultimately, you need to come hire an attorney, go to court, get an order signed by a judge that somebody can't just change because they're
They feel
upset
like
or
it.
their feelings are hurt or
Yeah.
whatever to deny you access as a child, because a routine is important for all children.
Yes.
Your routine's important for their parents as well, and the parent and the child, and also the school. Which bus are they riding? Are they riding a bus? Are they being picked up? Are they being dropped off? All of that, the school needs to know as well.
Yes.
How it's going to be, whether it's by court order or by verbal agreement, so that they know what to expect, so they can serve the child.
Exactly. And, like you said, they preferably before the school year starts, address drop-offs, pickups, parent-teacher conferences, volunteering for field trips. Are you gonna take turns? Is one person gonna do this? The other person, how does that, try to address those things before the school year starts, so that when things come up, you already have a plan or an agreement or something you've talked about.
Right. If you're able to communicate, which we hope you can,
yes,
that's important. Of course, you don't always know when the field trips are going to be, and
yes.
Are you in a position to take off work or whatever? But yeah, I think it's important. Once again, as I say in all of these episodes, it's all about communication.
Yes.
And communicating proactively, positively, from a neutral position, not from an attacking position.
Yes.
Not, assume that the other side wants what's best for the child, just like you want what's best for the child, and communicate appropriately that way.
Absolutely. All right, next question. So what happens if one parent wants to change the child's school or educational setting?
Okay. Again, there's two answers. Is there a court order signed by a judge, and is there not a court order signed by a judge? If it's a court order signed by a judge, then you're almost certainly going to have joint legal custody. You see joint legal custody in probably 95% of all cases, where each side gets an equal say in where the child is going to school and how the child is going to be schooled, whether it should be homeschooled, public school, private school, parochial school, whatever it's going to be. So, so if the child has been in school, then there obviously has been an agreement because the child has been going to a school. If one parent wants to change that and there's a court order and the other parent doesn't agree, then they've got to go to court and file a motion to modify the custody order, or to get the court to declare that the child can then move schools, and that this move to whatever school they want to move it to is in the best interest of the child. If they try to do that without asking if there is a court order, or even if there is not, the other side can go and file for a restraining order if they find out about it, to where they could file and ask for the court to enter a restraining order, keeping the parent from removing the child from the child's school until the court can make a determination. You could do that even if there's not a court order. Like, you can file a complaint for custody and immediately put a temporary restraining order motion in it and get a court to stop somebody from doing it. We're actually, as we're recording this at the end of March, we're actually doing that today here in my office, at the Breeden Law Office, in a case where the parties have recently separated. The mother has moved to Raleigh and is trying to take the kid out of Riverwood Elementary School and take the kid to some school in Raleigh. There is no custody agreement. They have just broken up in the last 3 weeks, and we're going to seek a restraining order to keep the kid at Riverwood until the court can make a custody determination and determine where the child should go to school. So if you don't have a custody order, as in the case we're talking about, the other case, you can file for a custody order immediately. You can file for a complaint, get a lawyer, and try to get a restraining order that way. If not, it's going to be up to who the school listens. If there's not a court order and it doesn't say who has custody, the question is, does the school listen to mom or does the school listen to dad if the parents don't agree? And, in that scenario, you need to get an attorney and you need to get a court order quickly if you do not want to see that child's school changed. We do a fair number of hearings every July and August on where is the child going to go to school. And often that involves the parents having moved from the original order, or the child is in private school and now one parent has decided they can't afford it and they want to see the child go to public school, and then the other parent really wants to keep the kid in private school and so we go and have that hearing with the judge. We had a hearing this past August of 24, and the choice was between whether the child was going to be homeschooled or the child was going to go to a charter school. And the parents had different opinions on that. But courts do make those decisions when the parents cannot agree on where the kids go to school. But I would say you can't just go unilaterally if the other parent is involved. if they're visiting and they're involved, you know where they are, and there isn't a court order, I still don't think you can just unilaterally go move the school without talking to the other parent, because you never know, you may end up in a court battle that you could have avoided if you could have had a conversation.
Yes. And for, listeners listening or people watching, when you say, go immediately and go get this restraining order, get a temporary custody order, they should know that it's temporary for the time being until, if you are newly separated,
right?
Then you go get a permanent one.
Right. Well, right. If you end up getting a restraining order, or sometimes we have to get emergency custody because the child's in danger, or the child's been taken out of the state somewhere else, it's only good for 10 days. So there's going to be a return hearing, and the court is going to address it fairly quickly.
Yes.
But the court is going to need to address it because in this situation, mom was at the school yesterday trying to remove the children. So we need to try to get an order today to stop that. Yep. And then there would be a return hearing within 2 weeks, and then everybody could have their say, and the court could say, okay, I'm almost certain the court is going to leave the child at school for this year, and then we'll have a custody hearing over the summer, and the court will decide where the child's going to go to school next year, sometime over the summer. That is probably what's going to happen. You never know. But I mean, there are things you can do to try to stop the kid from being removed from school.
Yeah. All right. Next question. So how can parents modify because we kind of touched on this already, but how else can parents modify their agreement to reflect the school year? Do they, again, like if they don't have an order, do they communicate with each other? Judge? Can they do a consent order instead of going to a judge? Like, how does that work?
Right. If you have a court order signed by a judge, you follow that court order until it is modified and you get a new court order. If you do not have a court order signed by a judge, then it really comes back to the same thing, communicating with the other parent, seeing if y'all can get on the same page about where the child's going to go to school, what type of school it's going to be, how it's going to be paid for. Now, there are opportunity scholarships in North Carolina where the state is paying for a lot of private schools that it wasn't paying for before. So that opens up new things. But, the other thing that becomes important is, how's the child going to get to and from school? Do the work schedules of both parents allow them to get to and from school? Is there bus service? Charter schools don't offer lunch. How, are they going to be able to afford lunch for the child? What kind of lunches is that going to be? Is somebody going to send lunch for the child? Who's going to pick the child up if the child's sick, depending on whose day it is? I mean, all of these things have to be worked out among the parents if you don't have a court order. If you have a court order, all of this stuff is usually addressed in the court order. But if you don't, but if you don't have a court order, once again, this is all about communication and seeing what y'all can agree to or not agree to, and ultimately do what's best for the child.
And I do know from personal experience, a lot of it largely depends on whose address the child uses on their school of record. So if it's your address and you're the one, with the busing and the transportation and the bus stop, they're going to assign you the bus route for your child to that address. But if your parent lives still within the school zone, but at a different address, I know I've had to wait a month or more for them to add that second bus route, bus stop, or whatever to my child's plan, basically, because they said, nope, we need a month to just get through all of the bus stops that we need to do now, and then we can start adding in more. But for now, we need a month to just figure everything out first and then add in.
Right. Well, the other thing that happens is, a lot of these school change things we were talking about earlier, nobody's left in the school district, right? And now with all these cap schools in Johnston, Harlan, and Wake counties, you can't just stay when everybody has moved out of that district. And so then the question is, and the majority of the time, if you have a primary custodian and it's not joint, and both parties have left the school district is going to be the one districted to the primary parent's address. If it's 50-50, that's a different game, because then it's which address are we going to use? But it is not uncommon today, with school districts changing and all that, for both parties to not live in the school district anymore. And then there has to be a decision made on where the child is going to go to school. And, and if the primary parent needs the bus and the bus only goes to their district at school, even if you go to court, they're probably going to go with that primary parent's address over the secondary parent's address, because that primary parent's going to need that bus more than the secondary. The secondary parent under this scenario is not even the district anyway. And so they're not going to be able to use the bus to start with.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. All right, next question. And you already touched on this, but can I make decisions about my child's school or extracurricular activities? So after school, sports, clubs, stuff like that, without consulting the other parent?
Again, do you have a court order signed by a judge or not?
Yeah.
If you have a court order signed by a judge, it will address extracurricular activities and stuff like that. As a general rule, if you do not have a court order signed by a judge, you can do the extracurricular activities. And even sometimes if you have a court order signed by a judge, but it cannot infringe on the other parent's custodial time. So if you have a court order signed by a judge and this activity is on Tuesday afternoons and you have every Tuesday afternoon, most of the time the other parent's not going to be able to object to it. But in all of these joint situations, no activity is just going to be on one parent's time, right? And so you really do have to have a discussion about what the activities are going to be. The court will not, particularly if you're in a situation where you have a court order and the other parent is only getting, say, every other weekend, which is rare now, but they still exist. The court is not going to allow the primary parent to put the kid in extracurricular activity and require the non-custodial parent to bring the child to that activity on their every other weekend. If that parent chooses to do it, fine. But
they don't have to.
If you don't have to. So if your kid plays soccer every Saturday and the non-custodial parent and that non-custodial parent does not have 50-50 or anywhere near 50-50, they just have every other weekend, they're not going to have to bring that child on their Saturday back to where you live to play soccer. The child is just going to miss half the games. So, but in most joint custodial situations, particularly if you have a court order signed by a judge, the court is going to address each child can have one activity and the parties are going to split the cost of that activity and the parties are going to get the child to that activity, because in a joint custody situation, if you don't have that in the order and the parties don't agree, then the child can do no activities or they can only do half of an activity.
Yeah.
You know, we've got one, we've got a week on, week off case right now where the child is in karate jiu-jitsu and one parent just refuses to take the child to karate jiu-jitsu or whatever it is. And so the child only goes every other week. And that child can only go to competitions on the weekends with the parent who's taking him, because the other parent is refusing to participate in it and refusing to pay for it, even though there's a court order. That's another issue. But so there is that. And so you have to think about, is the other parent going to participate? How is that going to affect the child? How is that going to affect the child's relationship with the other parent? Why is the other parent choosing not to participate? And see if you can't work through that. And then I think you have to tell the coaches when you sign up or you go to the draft, you know, they want to make the teams even, they have drafts. I think you have to disclose to everybody there with the organization, hey, look, he or she is only going to be at half the practices or half the games. If the other side is not willing to participate, you should consider that and whether you draft the child or whatever. And that is truly unfortunate. I think kids get a ton of education playing sports and doing extracurricular activities and be involved with other kids and all of that. But, you know, each parent's got their own thing. And, you know, these sports now have gotten to be crazy expensive, and the parents' financial situations might not be the same. And they may not be in a position to both afford these travel sports and all of that stuff, which have gotten to be crazy expensive. And I mean, if they save for college, what they spend on travel sports, they could probably pay for college. I know I probably have, so you have to think about that as well. And, and is it fair to the child to be on a team if they can only get to half the practices and half the games? Because that's going to affect their playing time, their ability to grow. And so you have to weigh all of these things if you have a parent who's just not going to cooperate at all, and if you have an order that does not address extracurriculars and one parent is refusing all extracurriculars, you can file a motion to modify, go to court and get the court to enter an order that says each child gets one extracurricular per season that they get to participate in. And it doesn't have to be travel. I'm just talking about regular gymnastics, regular dance, regular karate, travel's a whole nother thing. You will not see coaches, you will not see judges order parents to pay for travel sports and travel sports travel if they're not willing to just agree.
Yes. But rec league,
they're all about rec leagues.
You can miss as many games as you want and still go to the, those coaches and whatnot.
Right. And
they understand.
Right. And regular gymnastics, one night a week for $150 a month, that's fine. Yep. Regular dance, not competitive dance where you go to Myrtle Beach, not competitive cheer. I'm talking about just regular rec level of these sports, regular dancing, that kind of stuff. Judges are all about, but they are not going to order a non-custodial parent or even a joint parent who does not want to pay for travel sports and the travel cost of travel sports to pay for that. Yes. They're only going to do that if the parties agree. So if you want to do it and the other side doesn't want to agree, then you need to be willing to pay for all of it. And that may include paying for the other parent's hotel room for competitions that take place during that other parent's custodial weekend. Yeah. I've seen that. If it means that much to you that the child do it, then you would have to make it possible for that other parent to be able to go and take the child during their custodial time to the competition.
Have family law questions? Need guidance to navigate legal challenges? The compassionate team at Breeden Law Office is here to help. Visit us at www.breedenfirm.com for practical advice, resources, or to book a consultation. Remember, when life gets messy, you don't have to face it alone.
Now, what about school-sponsored sports? Because, we're talking about, rec league, travel ball. This is all outside of school. What about football or school soccer or school cheerleading? How does that factor in?
Those sports are affordable and often, they're not completely free, but they don't cost a ton of money.
Yeah, you should pay for a jersey or something.
Right. But again, the court is not going to make that non-custodial parent. If that non-custodial parent is an every other weekend or Thursday to Monday parent, bring the child to that activity at the school during their time. That parent may live 2 hours, 3 hours away. So again, that child is going to miss half the football games, half the basketball games. And if that's the scenario, then they're probably not going to be able to be on that team. Yeah. So again, I got tons of stories, right? Yeah. I had one this past year with the band. The band has band camp in August. It's like a week or two, and it's like 8 to 5, and it's really hot, but that's how they learn their music and the basic steps of whatever band show they're going to put on. Well, I had a case where the parent would not bring the child to band camp. Well, if the child doesn't come to band camp, then the child is behind. The band was willing to work with the child because they understood where he was, but the child didn't think it was fair to the other high school band members for him to miss the camp and then ultimately miss half the games and possibly half the competitions because the other parent was not going to participate at all in the high school band. And that's unfortunate because that child really enjoyed high school band, but there was nothing he nor the custodial parent could do to convince the non-custodial parent to participate in the band at all. And so that child didn't get to be in the band. And that's a consequence of people breaking up and separation and divorce. And that's truly unfortunate, but there wasn't anything I could do about it. I was not going to be able to get a judge to order this non-custodial parent to bring the child to this area. They lived an hour away, 5 days in a row for band camp. I was not going to convince a judge to bring that child to every other home football game from an hour away. If they didn't want to do it, it wasn't going to happen. And so the consequence was the child didn't get to be in the band.
That's unfortunate. And like you said, these particular extracurriculars might not cost as much, but they certainly almost always require much more of a time commitment than anything. So you're practicing pretty much every day after school, or like you said, you're going to a certain camp in the summer, and it's pretty much mandatory a lot of the times when they do that kind of thing.
But what I would say is, if you're going to have a problem, you're going to have a problem before you get to it. So before you commit to it, maybe, in this case, They met with the band director. The band director was willing to work with this child because he understood and wanted the child to be in the band. The child ultimately determined that he didn't think it was best for the rest of the band, given what he could do. But like, you can work with these coaches, you can talk to them, and let the coaches decide if they're willing to allow this child to participate, even though they're only going to be there when they're going to be there. These coaches they love kids, they're human beings, they're parents. And a lot of times they may be willing to allow the child to be on the team or be in the band. They may not have the same role, but they would be willing to let them be a manager, stuff like that, so that they could participate when they are available.
Exactly. And, I think you would probably agree when I say this, but because you said communicate proactively, right? Try to talk it out before you reach this point, where it's last minute, you're trying to figure everything out. Everybody's stressed. Nobody's, that emotions are high. Maybe do it earlier on when everybody's not as stressed and you can plan and all these things ahead of time. And if you do come to an agreement with the other parent, get it in writing.
Yeah, it would be nice if you could get it in writing. A court, and if you don't have a court order, you get it in writing. The court may give some weight to it. Why did you change your mind?
Well, you can always get a consent order without having to go to court.
That's true. If you already have a court order, you want to modify your court order, you can modify a court order by consent at any time by filing a motion and getting an order entered.
Yes. All right, last one. One of my co-parent and I disagree about the school schedule or school-related decisions. We've kind of already touched on this, but just one more time for the listeners.
Okay. All right. So if you disagree on the school schedule and you don't have a court order, well, if you have a court order, then you just follow the court order.
Yes.
Okay. Same thing I said, every answer. Yes. And the majority of the people out there do not have a court order. So that's why we give two different answers, right? But the vast majority of people do not have custody orders with the other parent. The vast majority of people have verbal agreements or handwritten contracts or whatever. But the answer does depend on whether you have one or not. If you have a court order signed by a judge, you have to do what the court order says. And if you don't like where the child's going to school, you don't like that school schedule, you can file a motion and ask the court to give you permission to change the child to a different school as far as that's concerned. What was the second part? School schedule or school
related decisions.
School related decisions. Okay. If you don't have a court order, then you're presumed to have joint legal custody under the law. If you do have a court order, there's a 95% chance you have joint legal custody. So it is very rare that people have a court order and it's sole legal custody. So if you have joint legal custody, whether you have a court order or not, you have joint legal custody. The court order says you have joint legal custody, or you don't have a court order, which means by default, if you're on the birth certificate, you do have joint legal custody. If you're not on the birth certificate, you need to get on the birth certificate, give Breeden Law Office a call. We can help you do that. So with that caveat, joint legal custody is you have the right to make decisions about your child's education, medical, religion, and you have equal decision-making power in that. If the two of you cannot agree, then you would need to go get a court order and have the court decide. You can keep joint legal, but every time you disagree, you would have to go to court and have the judge decide which way it's going to be in a joint legal situation. Now, the court can, if there's a lot and it's a high conflict case, the court can appoint a parenting coordinator, and the parenting coordinator, which is often another lawyer who's trained in this, and also sometimes psychologists and stuff like that, right, to make these decisions for the parents on behalf of the court. But the court doesn't have time to make all the decisions these parents disagree on.
Yeah, they can't see you every week.
No, they can't see you every week. And so, but the other thing the court will do, if it looks like they just can't agree, other than appoint a parenting coordinator, is the court may say, okay, it's joint legal, but I'm going to give one parent final decision-making authority, which means the parents have to communicate, the parents have to endeavor to agree, and if they can't agree, one parent gets to make the decision, which in my mind is no longer joint legal custody. Yeah. It really is sole custody because the other parent has to make a decision.
Doesn't matter what the other one says, right. I can still make the decision.
But with joint legal custody, you have access to the child's medical records, to the child's teachers, to the child's school records, all of that. So you can get the report cards. You can do parent-teacher conferences. You don't have to do parent-teacher conferences with the other parent. You can do your own parent-teacher conference. Yes. You can get on class dojo and send cupcakes and all of that kind of stuff. Like you can do everything as far as that's concerned. And so, but The other parent without a court order that says they have to give you this information doesn't. So you have to be proactive and go get it. You have to go to the court, go to the school with your driver's license and the birth certificate. And they often have the birth certificate. Here's my driver's license. I am on this child's birth certificate. I am a joint parent. I want to be on the email list for, bringing donuts, all that. I want to get the report card. I want access to Power School where the grades are and whether they're doing their homework. I want to be invited to the individual education plan meetings if the child has an IEP and all of that. And the school has to do that, whether you have a court order or not. But you have to let the school know you exist, particularly if the other parent enrolled the child and maybe didn't write your name down on the enrollment paperwork, which happens all the time. They didn't put you as the emergency contact, and they put stepdad or new boyfriend as the dad on the paperwork. Well, you're not going to know that if you don't go to the school and look at the paperwork. What do the records say? They need to know who you are. They need to know your address. They need to know your phone number. Yep. All of that stuff is very important. And we see so many often dads not do that. And then they come in here and they're like, I don't have any information. I don't know why. They don't have a court order. And the first thing we say is take your driver's license to the school and get access to all the records and ask for a copy of the entire educational file. And then we'll work from there. But, you've got to be proactively go do it. And we tell dads to do it, and probably half of them still don't. So, like I said, it's not, particularly these high conflict cases, they're not going to just give it to you. They don't want you to have it. They want to hold it over your head. But you can get it, but you're going to have to do something to go get it. And I think that's important. And of course, I think everybody in any kind of high conflict case should get a court order signed by a judge that is clear as to where everybody's supposed to be and what they're supposed to do. I think that is better for both parents. I think it's better for the children. But, not everybody does that. They don't want to pay for it. But I think it's worth doing if the communication is not good and it's a conflict. It's a high conflict case.
Absolutely. Worth doing right, and worth doing right the first time.
Correct. And make sure it is as detailed as possible to cover as many scenarios as possible. Because if you've got somebody, if the other parent is trying to mess over the other parent, then they're going to try to find every way they can. And all that does is hurt the child, but they don't see it that way. No. And that is unfortunate. And I say it every time. If the child grows up and realizes that one parent was alienating them from the other parent and messing with the other parent, when they grow up and they get adult reasoning and they can decide, they almost never have a relationship with the parent who did it, or they have a limited relationship with the parent who did it, and they are completely bonded to the parent who got alienated and the parent who got messed with and the parent who didn't get the time they should have had. And I see it over and over and over again. So if you're a parent who's trying to keep the child from the other parent or mess the other parent around about the time or not share the information with the other parent, stop, because the child is going to grow up and they're going to know what happened and they're not going to like it. And it hurts the child. If you're criticizing the other parent in any scenario, it's like stabbing that child in the heart, because that child is half the other parent. And while you may hate that other parent and you may hate his family and his new wife and everything about it, that parent is still that child's father or that child's mother. And that is one of the two most important people in the entire world to that child. And to criticize them and put them down is like stabbing that child in the heart and hurting that child. And you do not want to be hurting your child, and you're not accomplishing anything by doing it.
Yes. And same goes for, like you said, communication and making sure the other parent's contact information is included for school, sports, stuff like that. Because if they miss a practice, or if they miss a team party, or if they miss and the other parent just simply didn't get the email or the text or whatever, ultimately who misses out? The kid. Your kid misses out on that.
Right.
So
No doubt.
That's really what, people should have in their minds when they are playing games.
Right.
With
That's
the
true.
other parent.
That's true. All right. Well, that'll do it for this week's episode of the Best of Johnston County podcast, our special edition, Ask Jonathan Breeden Anything, where we talked about child custody in schools and education-related matters. If this is your first time listening to the podcast, please like, follow, subscribe to this podcast wherever you're seeing it, whether it be on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or any of the social media channels of the Best of Johnston County podcast. Also, tag us in your Instagram stories, Best of Johnston County, and give us a 5-star review. That helps us expand our reach of people. And this podcast only grows by you sharing it and leaving positive comments. So please do that. Until next time, I'm your host, Jonathan Breeden.
That's the end of today's episode of Best of Johnston County, a show brought to you by the trusted team at Breeden Law Office. We thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to sharing more interesting facets of this community next week. Every story, every viewpoint adds another thread to the rich tapestry of Johnston County. If the legal aspects highlighted raise some questions, help is just around the corner at www.breedenfirm.com.